Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today as co-host is Chris Rossini. Chris, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Well, very good. Good to have you because I want to talk a little bit today about crony capitalism and socialism. You know, it's surprising how often the word socialism is thrown around these days. Bernie Sanders seems to have called it back into vogue. I thought everybody gave up on it. I thought the 20th century destroyed the whole idea of socialism, the total failure of the socialist state when the Soviet system came down. And in reality, it really has been. Socialism has been totally destroyed as far as being, a functional system. And when you look at what's happening in Venezuela and Zimbabwe with runaway inflation and the many other problems, you'd think, well, maybe they would give up. But then others look at it and say, hey, America's not doing too badly. The economy's picking up, and we just need better managers. And when we do have problems, and they'll admit, well, the inequity of the system and the problems that are out there, then they'll say, it's the free market is at fault. And of course, what I want to talk about today, Chris, is the fact that when they use these words, they're too careless, and everybody knows that distortion of words is a very serious problem, so we'll try and clarify that, at least in our minds, about socialism. But when they say that we need socialism, that's the theme of Bernie Sanders, because of the failure of the free market, we sort of have to cringe. At least I do. I cringe. And what is he doing? Because we don't have a free market, and yet that's preached all along the way. It's the free market that's failing, and that's why there's the shortcomings, and that's why people are suffering, and why there's people still sleeping on the streets. So what we need is socialism. And then it becomes even more annoying when you hear the young people gathering on the college campuses and shouting about socialism. I think that's some propaganda and a distortion. So I don't think that's as serious a problem as it seems to, but at least it gets on the news, and the bad guys are always using it, that we have to do something because of the total failure of the free market system, and we have to stop that, and the only answer is socialism. I'm sure you have seen those and listen to some of those conversations, and I think the Austrian economic philosophy has some answers to that dilemma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's after the last century where over 100 or 200 million people died at the hands of their own socialist governments, to think that this idea is worthy of even talking about anymore is astonishing. But it's important to know, and that's what most people, they don't know what socialism is. They just walk around with slogans. But socialism, pure socialism, means the abolishment of private property. The state is the sole owner of property. And they failed because when there's only one owner of property, there are no market transactions. You can't have trade. And without trade, you can't have market prices. Without market prices, you can't have profits and losses. And without profits and losses, you have no idea what to produce, in what quantity, where to produce it. They're totally in the dark. And that has been tried, that has been done, and they totally failed because they did not know what to do. There was no market, and there was no way to gauge what should be produced and how or where to do it.
Right. And they do so much rationalization. They say the communists always say the withering away of the state, and we're going to have this utopia, and the common man is going to be in charge. And they rationalize to the point where, well, a little bit of force here and there is necessary, in order to bring this about. And they justify this, and these millions and millions of people who've died over this, because they endorse the principle of use of force, which is exactly opposite of what is accomplished in a free society. That means people have freedom of choice, and they have responsibility, and they are rewarded for their efforts, in contrast to assuming that a few smart people get in government and they're given this authority to use force and dictate and plan, and therefore then you have to say, well, you have to give up a little bit of freedom. And we've heard that a lot, especially after 9/11. I was told, well, Ron, you have to give up a little bit of your freedom. You have to give more power to the government to be safe. In economics, it's the same thing. You have to give up a little bit of your freedom because the poor people have to be taken care of. But you pointed out very well in your statement that the results are so lousy. Poor people get poorer, and there's more starvation, and the more socialism, the worse it is. But socialism, there are definitely degrees on it, because total socialism or a system like the Soviets, they own everything, they dictate everything, they make every single decision. It's a total disaster. But there's a phenomenon where there's a transition. We have interventionism, and we have examples of a great deal of power in certain sections. Some people would say, well, Obama gave us socialized medicine. That, to me, is not exactly true, because it's a corporate medicine is what we have. It's intervention, and there's a lot of corporations that influence, the practice of medicine. So it isn't socialized, even though there's a lot of mischief. They cause shortages and all when they come in and do price fixing. But I had one experience of really seeing firsthand what happens when you destroy the pricing structure. In my lifetime, and I remember it clearly because there was rationing. World War II, there was wage and price control and rationing in the midst of war, which people tolerated more, but the markets really didn't work. There was a lot of shortages and because of rationing. But not too long after that, we had rationing during the Korean War. But during the 70s, when after the Bretton Woods broke down and we were having inflation up to 14, 15% and interest rates high, they had to do something. And that, when Nixon closed the gold window, what he also did was institutionalize wage and price control. And what I remember so clearly about that, they knew the prices would get fixed. I was practicing medicine at the time, and my office call was $5, and I was getting ready and wanted to go up to $7.50, because everything was going up in price. But everything was frozen. Matter of fact, the prices in medicine were frozen longer than some other thing. But the one thing that I noticed is that I was involved in doing some building and things at that time. There was a shortage the next day, because there was a freezing of it. There could be no more passing the cost through or paying a little bit more to get the products you want, and the shortages just popped up immediately. And then there was the signs of a black market. If you paid a little extra, you could get something. But I was amazed that how important the pricing structure was. But if the businessman was going to break even and not make a living or lose money, he's not going to do it. He had to quit doing it, and that's why the shortage has occurred. So, but socialism, of course, is total socialism, is total control. Nobody should be tempted to do this. But, Chris, I think this has all been fed, which I've said so many times, through an educational system, government education, cradle to grave, the terrible examples of economic education in our universities, the influence now of cultural Marxism, and all, which is the social part of it. But today it's also the attention that Sanders got as saying, I'm a socialist and this is what I'll do. And students rally around that to some degree, but I don't think they have the vaguest idea because they don't even hear our side of the story. But I think the biggest issue that challenges us, Chris, is the fact that they get away with arguing, well, capitalism is failing, the free market doesn't work, there's still a lot of problems, there's too much special interest, the rich are getting richer, and there's still people out on the street, and therefore we need socialism. That, I think, is where the fallacy is, because they're not talking about and criticizing free markets. I think that's our job, is try to change that attitude.
Yes, education is where it all begins, and hopefully we help on the education part with our shows and our articles and everything. But how did we get today to this corporate state that we have? And it actually started with a man named Benito Mussolini. He was a socialist, but obviously socialism, pure socialism, is a total failure. So he's like, okay, we're not going to abolish private property and market prices. We'll have these things, but we'll have them in name only, meaning government's going to run the show, and it's going to run it with its corporate partners. and there would be all these cooperatives, he called them, but basically it's like what we have today with our million agencies that are all staffed with corporate people. So it's a marriage of corporations and government, and that's how we get crony capitalism. And that's the history of how we got to this failed moment that we're at right now.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect explanation about that, and it's based on the principle of authoritarianism. We have authoritarianism in economic planning and what we have today, and the monetary system that we have. But Mises warns about this. You know, where corporations and government come together and they become partners. And I have heard that so much over the years. You have to be partners with the government. But Mises predicted that will lead to socialism. And it didn't mean that it would lead to the Soviet type of socialism. He was more thinking that it would lead to a fascism where, and you mentioned, a pretense, you know, that you have ownership. I tell people, I don't think we own our property even now. We rent the property. If we don't pay our taxes, we don't have any property. And if we want to use the property, we have to get permission from the state. So we aren't true ownerships of our property. We're not true ownerships of what we earn. But it's a pretty good facade. It's a fake, and people seem to buy in it. Well, we do have freedom, you know. But unfortunately, what happens for this, it makes the social condition much worse, because the rich are able to get the influence with the government. And if you still have one step away from, you know, the Mussolini type of vicious socialism, you have the big corporations doing quite well. So whether it's the social media networks that work with government, and whether it's the military industrial complex, so it opens the door for people to saying, well, I have to make a big investment in government. I have to have influence. I have to have my lobbyists and this sort of thing, which further, you know, gives the spread of the benefits. The rich do gain more that way, because the poor, they don't get to lobby. They get thrown crumbs, and we pretend that, oh, we have a good system. And that's why a lot of times it's either by a major error in thinking, or they're total hypocrites from the left. They'll say, well, we'll take care of the poor and we're going to feed them. But when you look at it, if you look at Hillary's campaign, I mean, she was hardly a bleeding heart liberal when you saw behind the scenes what was going on and what she was doing, and how where did she collect all this money, you know, for her foundation. I think it's a typical example of what happened. But I think both parties have endorsed this type of system. So the real challenge is to try to convince people that we can have greater prosperity. And it's a much better system to get the government out of the way, and hopefully we can have a little influence in nudging our country in that direction.
Yes, and as socialists walk around with just platitudes and no intellectual base remaining, either intellectually or practically, we have history. We, the free market crowd, we have an intellectual foundation. We have Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard. They did all the work for us, but their ideas have to reach the common person, the average person, and it's available to the people that are watching the show. If you go to Mises.org, MISES.org, you can read all of their works, their books, their articles, all for free. And once you read them and understand them, it's your job, just like ours, to speak, because that's the only way the ideas go from one person to the next.
All right, and you know, I think that the opposition to what we're talking about are able to grab the moral high ground. They have always, you know, said we're for the underprivileged, the underdog, and we want to help and we want to redistribute the wealth. And they're the bleeding hearts, and they grab the moral high ground. And then they turn it around and they say, if you and I are going out and start a business, that we said, you know what? We have 5 investors, we have this little business, and our job is to have a successful business. Our job is to give a good product. Our job is to make profits. Our job is to expand. And we may even decide to keep the profits. And people say, oh, no, that's not charitable. You have to give them away and do all these sorts of things. But you know, in a free and prosperous society, I really believe in the American system that people in America are very generous even under today's condition. But even if you had somebody working that was, vulnerable to the charge. Well, he's selfish. He wants to keep what he earns. But to me, it's sort of like working and providing for yourself is sort of like the necessity of breathing oxygen to live. Working and providing for yourself is very noble indeed, and even if you don't become charitable in the conventional sense, you're still doing a tremendous service to you, yourself, and your family, and also to the other people that we're not going to be stealing from through the government activity. But I don't think that really is a concern, but we shouldn't be harping on the fact, well, capitalism is selfishness and they want to keep what they earn. And this is the wonderful thing about liberty. Liberty can be used in the social sense for whatever people do. They can do wonderful things, and they can have their religion, or they can be atheists or whatever. In economics, it's the same way. If you're honest with your production, which you have to be in a free market and protect property rights and live up to contracts, that if you make profits, you're not obligated to do anything. That you're also, if you do it under these circumstances, you're still providing a tremendous service to society, because you're being productive, you're producing jobs, and there's no necessity to. But I just don't think it's necessary. But if people know that, and they shouldn't feel guilty about making profits. I think the people who should feel guilty, and that annoy me, that are making profits because they are partners with the government, and they're getting contracts, they're in the military industrial complex, and they're getting all this. That's where the guilt should be. So there's a total difference between free market success and crony capitalism, and therefore socialism can hardly be the answer. One thing is, Chris, I think we've moved away from that in spite of this peak or a little uplift and a little attention given to socialism. But I don't think it's going to go too far. And if you care to make, Chris, a closing statement, I think we'll close our show for today.
Yes, I have more of a warning, because our Mussolini-style crony capitalism has failed. However, what will replace it is still up for grabs. And the people who are for liberty, we have a fighting chance. But we're up against socialists who go under different names. They won't use the name socialism. There's people who want a technological tyranny over us, where forget about your freedom, you're just a glob of data that they're going to manipulate. And there's also a religious environmental aspect to it, to where your life is micromanaged by the powers that shouldn't be for the planet. And then finally, the political correctness. This is also socialism where your mind is micromanaged, what you can say, what you can do, what you can think. So we have a lot of forces against us, but like I said, we have a fighting chance.
Right, and I think that's a good summary, and I think of it in terms of choice, whether it's social, religious, or sexual, anything. In a free society, you have choices. And what are the rules? No rules? What do you mean? The government has to tell us what we can do or can't do. No, we have basic fundamental moral rules that should be enforceable, and that is that you have property and you have a right to your property, and nobody has the right to take it. The government doesn't have the right to take it from you and steal it from you. Other people can. You can't lie, cheat, steal, or kill. That's about it. Something that's been around for thousands of years. Basic fundamental rules. And then when you have that, the individual makes choices. Does it solve all the problems? No, but it solves one big one. And that is the incentive for bad people to get into government and control the government so that they can control the people and mold what they think will be their idea of a utopia. Even if it's well intended, it can still be very evil. But the main thing is to protect choice, whether it's choice in your religious or non-religious beliefs, and what you want to do with your life, and where you want to work, what you want to do, and all your incentives, and be able to take care of yourself. And this to me is something that we should protect. For years now, we've heard about pro-choice, pro-choice. But I tell you what, the real pro-choice is your life and your liberty to be able to lead that life as long as you don't hurt other people, and that you don't exert aggression of other people, and you respect other people's property. Believe me, that is what free choice is about, and it will be less than perfect, but I'll tell you what, adhering to that principle will allow us at least a chance at moving in the direction of a society that has barely existed throughout all history, and there's no reason why we should give up on it. We should never turn our back on moving toward liberty and saying, well, maybe we better rethink this socialism stuff. Maybe we can just have better managers. That will not work. So, of course, our vote is for freedom and liberty and private property ownership based on a moral principle of non-aggression. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.